Sometimes mysteries can seem to have very obvious answers, even if those answers haven't yet been discovered. Others can have twists that leave investigators puzzled and obscure the real story of what happened. Number 10. In 1915, peat farmers in Denmark made a gruesome discovery. Beneath the soil, in a trench near the village of Vitup, they found a collection of bones. Many belonged to an ancient bovine, but some were human in nature. There have been many bog bodies found across Europe. The oxygen-free environment can stop the bodies from deteriorating over time. Some people that have been recovered from these ancient bogs simply look like they're sleeping and could have passed away only a short time ago. The Vitup Man doesn't appear to have been that lucky. He was first identified by his right ankle bone, a lower left shin bone, his jaw, and parts of his skull. Since he was discovered, scientists have been trying to figure out what happened to him and what his life might have looked like. It's estimated that he lived between 3300 and 3100 BC and was between 30 and 40 years of age. Many bog body victims are believed to have once been sacrificed by the community they lived in. We don't know much about the early religious beliefs of these ancient people that lived more than 5,000 years ago, but researchers believe it might have been a sacrifice to some kind of fertility goddess or god of harvest. It seems likely that the Vitup Man met his end in the same way. As well as the bovine bones he was buried with, archaeologists found a club and ceramic vessels. But there are some significant differences between the typical bog body and this unusual individual. Many of the recovered victims have distinguishing features or malformations. According to researchers, ancient people likely thought these features were indicators that the victim was significant in some way. From the remains that we do have, this doesn't appear to be the case with the Vitup Man. He also met an end that was much more violent than the typical victim. Looking at the wounds on the man's skull, scientists determined that he was struck around 8 times, likely with the club that he was found buried with or something similar. But the strangest part of this mystery was revealed when scientists analyzed the Vitup Man's teeth. By analyzing isotopes in the tooth enamel, it was possible to determine where he'd grown up and other details about his life. It had long been thought that the individual was no different than any of the others living in the area, but the isotopes revealed that he'd grown up somewhere on the coast of the Scandinavian peninsula. It also revealed that during his early childhood, he'd most likely eaten fish and marine animals. Sometime in his teens, his diet switched to foods from a farm, such as sheep, goat, cereals, and dairy. Researchers believe that the Vitup Man was born in a foraging community in Scandinavia, and then moved to a farming community in Denmark later in life. Why and how he came to live here is a mystery. It's possible that he began trading with his southern neighbors, and then decided to settle there. Another theory is that he was forcibly taken to Denmark for some reason, and was later accepted by the community. Whether the fact he was an outsider had anything to do with his untimely end is another mystery. We don't yet know enough about these Neolithic and Mesolithic people to determine whether that would have been a factor. It's believed that the Vitup Man has many more mysteries for scientists to uncover, and may play an important role in unraveling the truth about our ancient past. Number 9. Today, King Tut is one of the best-known ancient Egyptian pharaohs, though he was a relatively unimportant king. The reason why the boy king became so famous was because modern archaeologists found his tomb intact and undisturbed. The vast majority of ancient Egyptian tombs were ransacked during the classical era. Those that didn't were often destroyed by looters in later eras who wanted to collect artifacts during Egyptomania. Together, they left behind little for archaeologists to uncover. So when archaeologists believed they'd found a new sealed tomb in 2017, it was an amazing discovery. What they'd actually uncovered, though, was even more puzzling. The mysterious tomb was located in the Dashur complex in northern Egypt. The site is much less famous than Giza and other pyramid complexes, and has only recently been opened to the public. But it was here where Sneferu built his famous bent pyramid between 2613 and 2589 BC. It marked a significant change in the pyramid building style, away from the stepped pyramids into more famous smooth-sided pyramids. Many other pyramids would be built on the site, including Sneferu's second attempt at a smooth-sided pyramid, and a collection of pyramids from the 12th and 13th dynasties. Most of these pyramids aren't standing today. They either collapsed over time or were buried in sand, or were otherwise destroyed by people reusing stones for newer building projects. But the pyramids left scars on the landscape that Egyptologists can still investigate. One of these was uncovered by quarry workers in 2017. While none of the above-ground structures remain, there is still something to be seen below ground. Archaeologists uncovered a passageway that led under where the ancient monument would have stood. At the end of the passage, they found a chamber which was still sealed by a stone slab. It took years, but eventually archaeologists received permission to remove the stone and reveal what was within the chamber. What they uncovered left them both amazed and disappointed. Rather than finding a tomb stocked with burial goods and fine artifacts, they found the place had already been disturbed. The tomb was mostly empty, but there was evidence that it had once been used. It's not known if there had once been a mummy buried within the chamber, but it seems likely that this was the case. Archaeologists were left with two questions. The first concerned the occupant of the tomb, or at least its intended occupant. While many of the burials in the area were those of the royal family, there were also burials for other nobles and important figures. The tomb may have belonged to the relative of one of the more ancient kings, who'd once been buried in the area, or someone who worked under him. Unfortunately, we know nothing about this individual's life, as nothing that was left behind has tipped archaeologists off about their identity. The other mystery concerns how looters were able to get into the tomb without disturbing the seal outside. When Tut's tomb was uncovered, archaeologists found rope wrapped around the handle of the door. It's not clear whether something similar was done here, or if there was something that could be more easily replaced. One hypothesis is that the destruction was done by the tomb builders themselves, who took everything valuable from the chamber before sealing it behind them. Archaeological work at Dashur is ongoing, and there may be more mysteries to be uncovered here. Number 8. Kauai State Park in Hawaii can look like a paradise on Earth for some, with steep slopes covered in green vegetation and a view of the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately, it's also a dangerous place, where many individuals have lost their lives climbing the slopes of Mount Waialele. In the case of Stephen Reisberg and his wife Jenny Sun Reisberg, whether they met their end on the mountain is still a mystery. Stephen was a 34-year-old doctor from Boston, Massachusetts. He'd recently been given a new position at the New England Medical Center and married his new wife, Jenny. Jenny was 28 years old at the time of her disappearance and a doctoral candidate at Harvard University. Both individuals were very intelligent and had experience in the outdoors. At the end of August 1990, they traveled to Wyoming to go on a hiking trip in the Teton Mountains. From there, they went to California to visit with friends before flying to Hawaii. It was only supposed to be a short trip. They arrived on the island of Kauai around September 6th and were scheduled to be home by September 9th. That date came and went, and there was no sign of the young couple. Their family and friends weren't immediately worried. Stephen and Jenny would often change travel plans at the last minute. It was easy to imagine them deciding they wanted to spend longer in such a beautiful place. But when Jenny didn't return to university as planned, her professors at the school contacted authorities. Investigators traced Stephen and Jenny to the Kauai National Park. They were last seen on or shortly after September 9th, when they visited the museum at the park. A staff member there reported that they spent an hour going over the maps of the park, which is roughly 4,000 acres. The focus of their trip was Mount Waialele, the second highest point on the island, and one of the rainiest places in the world. Due to the wet conditions, there are lots of boggy areas around the mountain, as well as some stunning waterfalls. It's a difficult hike, and staff at the park tried to warn the couple not to go. They were determined to reach the summit though, so left never to be seen again. Their car was located on September 27th at Puokila Lookout. The couple's fully packed backpacks and suitcases were still in the car, as well as their camping equipment and tickets for their flight home. Investigators believe this indicated they hadn't planned for a very long journey, but it could also be that they'd already made their way back to the car after the hike before they vanished. Among their belongings was a half-filled container of juice. Fingerprints were taken from the vehicle, but there was nothing to indicate anybody other than Stephen and Jenny had been there. There was no sign of a struggle or foul play. A search of the park took place, utilizing helicopters with heat-seeking equipment and search dogs to try to locate the missing couple. The only thing that was ever found was a scarf that looked similar to one in Jenny's suitcase. It was never established whether this actually belonged to her, though. Another hiker also reported hearing a woman moaning, but this also couldn't be definitively linked to Jenny. At first, this seems like a simple case of two people getting lost in the wilderness, but people have put forward other theories. In the past, there have been cases of people meeting foul play in the park. There are a number of plantations where illegal substances are grown. Stumbling across such places has led to some people having their lives taken. This may have happened to Stephen and Jenny. Others believe the couple faked their disappearance to start fresh somewhere else. It seems like an unlikely theory, but one with a small amount of hope. Number 7. In May of 1992, after more than 2 decades in the ring, Canadian wrestler Dino Bravo quit the sport. Less than a year later, he would have his life taken while he watched hockey in the comfort of his own home. Bravo's real name was Adolfo Bresciano. He was born in Italy but moved to Canada with his family when he was still young. His interest in wrestling began when he was still a child, and in the 1970s, he moved from being an amateur to a professional. Early in his career, he worked with other wrestlers and took the World Tag Team title, as well as the Canadian Heavyweight title while competing by himself. In the 1980s, he made his return to the WWF and became a popular figure. He was described as being dependable and competed in several WrestleManias. While Bravo had focused on technical moves early in his career, he now developed a strongman gimmick that made him a fan favorite. Unfortunately for Bravo, his appeal wouldn't last. For some reason, WWF promoters didn't see Bravo as fitting into their future plans. Bravo left the ring in March of 1992 and began coaching young athletes who wanted to go into wrestling. Sadly, there have been a lot of instances of sports people struggling to adjust to post-career life after their retirement. The phenomenon is also familiar in wrestling, and many former wrestlers lose their lives prematurely. Bravo had spent his entire life up until that point focusing on wrestling, and going into a normal 9-to-5 job would have been impossible for him. He'd earned a considerable amount of money throughout his career, and he liked to live a luxurious lifestyle. That included sports cars and a large house for himself, his wife, and their young daughter. Even after he retired, he continued to live that lifestyle, but his income couldn't keep up with it. His debts became a serious problem, and he had to borrow money from his mother to support himself. A family member offered Bravo a way out of those problems. His aunt had married Vincenzo Cotroni, a crime boss connected to the 5 families in New York. He had also had a short-lived wrestling career when he was young, but now was making money by more nefarious means. Cotroni had offered Bravo work multiple times, and after his retirement, Bravo gave in. He started with smuggling cigarettes and quickly developed a monopoly in the market. His work attracted people who dealt with more illegal substances, and Bravo agreed to get involved with these deals. Everything began to go wrong in March of 1993. Bravo had left a package at a warehouse for an associate to pick up. It took 3 days for the associate to arrive, and when he did, he found the police had gotten there first. Bravo argued that his associate should have come sooner, but there was a lot of pressure on him from within the organized crime rings. On March 10th, Bravo's wife took their daughter to ballet lessons, while Bravo watched a hockey game on TV. When she returned home, she found Bravo's body. He was still on the sofa, the remote control in his hand, but he'd been struck by multiple bullets. There was no sign of forced injury. There also weren't any footprints in the snow outside. It was believed Bravo knew his attacker and had invited them in. How they managed to escape without being noticed is unclear, but they left behind no evidence to identify them. Most believe that the crime was connected to Bravo's organized crime connections, but the person who pulled the trigger and the one who ordered the attack have never been identified. Number 6. In the quest for speed, many people have lost their lives, on land, at sea, and in the air. All these events are tragic, but there's something even more disturbing when the person involved simply disappears into thin air, leaving loved ones wondering what happened to them. Captain Mansell Richard James was one individual who vanished, not during a record attempt, but on his way home after putting in his attempt. James was born in Ontario, Canada in 1893. During the First World War, he served as part of the Royal Air Force and saw combat in the skies over Europe. He was praised for his work as a scout and for his determination when going into combat. In 1918, he won the Distinguished Flying Cross. After the war, he returned to Canada with a Sopwith Camel, the type of plane he'd flown during the war. He left the Air Force, but his interest in planes and flying didn't leave. At the time, there were many competitions across America, enticing aviation enthusiasts to try to break records. These would often be sponsored by the local newspapers or businesses, with the hopes of putting the local town on the map and bringing in more business. The Boston Globe's competition was no different. The newspaper was offering $1,000 to the pilot who could fly from Atlantic City, New Jersey to Boston, Massachusetts the fastest. James decided to take on the challenge in his faithful Sopwith Camel. When he took off from Atlantic City, the record was an average of 90 miles per hour. He landed in Boston, having achieved an average of 115 miles per hour, even though he had to face headwinds during his flight. The Boston Globe expected James to take the prize, but there were still other competitors who hadn't flown yet, so James didn't have the money in his pocket just yet. James flew to an airfield nearby to refill the air ballast tank on his plane before journeying back to Atlantic City. While there, he realized the compass on his plane was broken. This shouldn't have been too much of a problem for James. Even though he hadn't flown in this part of the world before, he believed he would be able to navigate using the railway lines of New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. He took off at about 6 p.m. on May 28, 1919, but somewhere along the way, James mixed up the railway lines and began to head further west. About 90 minutes after taking off, James landed in the town of Tyringham and chose to stay the night there. In the morning, he took off again, intending to follow the river this time to Long Island. He would refuel in an airfield near there, then make the journey to Atlantic City. But James would never land at that airfield or anywhere else. Multiple searches took place, but it was difficult to figure out where James could have gone down. There were multiple places where he could have gotten lost, and the area that he was flying over was mostly rural. Witnesses called investigators with reports of airplanes that they'd spotted, hoping it would give the search teams clues as to the direction James was heading. But unfortunately, it seemed like at least some of the sightings were of a plane other than James. There were a few reports of people coming across downed aircraft in the months and years following James's disappearance. But unfortunately, none of these could ever be confirmed, and it was impossible to tell. Despite the century that has passed since Captain James went missing, and the development of the areas that he could have gone down in, his wreckage and remains have never been found. Number 5. Pyute Legend tells of an ancient underground world beneath Death Valley in California. While today this is mostly dismissed as nothing more than a story, claims made by a handful of explorers in more recent times have helped to make people question that assumption. The Pyute people have been living in the area for hundreds of years and possibly even longer. According to the legend, it was several thousand years ago when a great chief discovered the underground city, the city of Shinov. His wife had passed away, and the chief believed there was no point continuing on without her. He decided to take his physical body to the spirit world. Following the spirits of Pyute warriors who had passed, the chief navigated through a labyrinth of underground tunnels. He eventually came to a chasm with a narrow stone bridge across. On the other side, he could see daylight and greenery. The chief made his way across the bridge to the meadows on the other side. There, he was greeted by the daughter of the Shinov ruler of this mysterious place. He explained that he'd come for his wife and wasn't leaving without her. The woman led him to an amphitheater where the chief saw all the Pyute people who had passed. They were all happy and dancing. He was told to wait there and he would eventually see his wife. But when he found her, he would have to take her quickly and not look back as he made his way through to the world of the living. After 3 days, the chief saw his wife. He did as instructed, taking her by the hand and pulling her back to the bridge across the bottomless chasm. But while he was on the bridge, the chief looked back at the green meadow that he'd left behind. His wife suddenly disappeared and he was now alone. The chief made his way back to the world of the living and spread the story of this underground world. It would be easy to dismiss as myth, similar to the story of Orpheus, if it weren't for later stories from the same place. In 1947, 2 men came forward with a strange story. Dr. F. Bruce Russell had just moved to the area for his health after retiring from the medical profession. He and a friend, Dr. Daniel Bovey, were checking out mining opportunities in Death Valley when they stumbled across a series of caves. In the caves, they found the mummified remains of men between 8 and 9 feet tall. They wore clothes that looked to be made of something similar to sheepskin. Around them were symbols carved into the rock, which seemed to match ancient Egyptian and Native American designs. Through another tunnel, the men found what they described as a ritual hall, with the remains of what looked like elephants, tigers, and dinosaurs. They tried to get funding to further explore the tunnels, but could never find the entrance again. Shortly after this, both Russell and Bovey disappeared. Russell's car was found in a remote area of the desert with a burst radiator and his suitcase still in the car. Another story came from the 1920s, when a prosecutor claimed to have stumbled across a similar series of tunnels after falling through a mine shaft. He also found mummies and golden artifacts, and claimed that the area was lit by a mysterious greenish-yellow light. After hearing the story, a Native American guide and trapper named Thomas Wilson came forward with a similar story. He claimed his grandfather had found the same tunnels, lit by the same greenish-yellow light. But this time, the area was inhabited by fair-skinned people who spoke a mysterious language. These could all be nothing more than stories, but they might have all been inspired by some mysterious tunnels that may once have been an ancient burial place. Exploring this part of the world is extremely difficult, and there might be more history to uncover beneath the sand and stone. Number 4. In the 1910s, Marie Empress was a name that was famous on both sides of the Atlantic. The vaudeville performer had made the successful transition to a silent film actress, and she was described as the most beautiful woman in pictures. But on an October night in 1919, she vanished from an ocean liner, never to be seen again. Marie Empress had started life as Mary Ann Louisa Taylor, the eldest daughter of a house painter living in England. When she was 18, she married a dentist, becoming Mary Ann Louisa Horton, and looked set to live an ordinary life in obscurity. But Marie became fascinated with the theater. Her interest turned into a successful career as a singer, dancer, actress, and even a male impersonator. It became too much for her husband, and the couple separated. Marie reinvented herself several times. She was the daughter of a former Lord Mayor of London and a French actress, and she was related to a famous Shakespearean actor. After reaching stardom in England, she tried to find the same success in the US. She would find her niche in the new media of silent films. She was best known for playing vamps, seductresses who lured men into their doom. In 1917, she returned to England to continue her career there, but decided to return in 1919. On October 19th, she boarded the ocean liner Orduna in Liverpool to travel to New York. Marie was in good spirits when she boarded the ship. One witness described her as being as lively as a cricket. But there was something a little strange about Marie during the trip. She dressed entirely in black and wore a veil. It almost appeared as if she was in mourning, though her energy didn't seem to match that. According to one stewardess, Marie interacted with her often during the week-long trip to America. The stewardess remained anonymous during the interviews that were later published, but historians believe she was Margaret Farley, an elderly woman working on the ship. Margaret revealed that Marie had told her that she may get married soon, and that she was worried about going to New York as she didn't have any friends there. This was even though Marie had lived in New York for a time. Marie was last seen on October 25th. Earlier in the day, the ship had docked at Halifax, where Marie had sent a telegram to a hotel in New York reserving a room. She was later seen in her cabin, stateroom 480. There are two separate versions of events from two different crew members. Margaret claimed that she spoke with Marie at 6 p.m. to ask if she wanted anything to eat. Marie at first refused, then ordered some chicken. She also asked Margaret to bring sandwiches to her room at 9:30, which was a nighttime routine for the young actress. When Margaret brought the sandwiches, there was no sign of Marie, so she left them by the door. The following morning, the sandwiches were still there, and Marie's bed hadn't been slept in. A steward told a similar but different story, claiming that Marie had called and asked for a glass of water at 6:30, which he delivered. He expected another call at around 10:30 for sandwiches, but that never came. The following morning, he went to check on Marie, only to find the room empty. The captain was alerted before noon on October 26th, and a search of the ship took place, but there was no sign of Marie. The porthole in Marie's room was too small for her to climb through, and was locked from the outside. If Marie had gone overboard, she would have to have navigated the many corridors and salons, which were filled with crew and other passengers. As a famous movie star, someone would have noticed her passing through, but nobody did. The decks were also well lit, and it's unlikely she could have slipped off the ship without being noticed. At first, it was believed that this was all a hoax. Marie was known to have performed publicity stunts in the past, as had her manager. Newspapers expected that she would turn up soon, and some even argued that she should be punished for the stunt, but Marie would never show up again. Some people still believe Marie faked her own passing, but decided not to make a return to the theater, or at least not as Marie Empress. She may have changed her identity again and returned to the stage in England, or to a quiet life in retirement where nobody knew who she was. Number 3. The Mycenaean period of ancient Greece has been called the Age of Heroes. It was during this time that the famous heroes of Greek myth and legend were believed to have lived. So a mystery involving the tomb of what is believed to have been a cult hero is even more intriguing to historians and archaeologists trying to uncover more about this age. The Mycenaean civilization was a Bronze Age culture that existed between roughly 1750 and 1050 BC. It was named after the most powerful city-state of the time, Mycenae, which the myths stated was founded by the ancient hero Perseus. But it wasn't the only great city. 20 kilometers south of the ruins of Mycenae lies another once great city from the age. When first approaching Tiryns, visitors would first see the great Cyclopean walls. These are the same walls mentioned by Homer in his epic poems and have stood the test of time in most places. The defensive walls are 750 meters long, 13 meters high, and almost 7 meters thick in some places. They're built out of giant irregular stones with no mortar between them. Ancient Greeks attributed their construction to Cyclops. The wall surrounds a large palace complex and citadel where the royal family would have once lived. Tiryns reached its height of power between 1400 and 1200 BC. It was never quite as powerful as Mycenae, and may have acted as a port to the city, but it's still a treasure trove for archaeologists today. In 1913, the excavations of a site roughly a kilometer away from the citadel revealed something extraordinary. This was once the site of an ancient burial ground with many tombs dating back to the Mycenaean times. But one of these stood out as unusual. It was a Tholos tomb built on the west slope of Prophetess Elias Hill. The tomb is shaped like a beehive and made from roughly cut stone slabs. A trench lined with brick walls leads to the entrance of the tomb, which was sealed with a double door. Unfortunately for archaeologists, it was mostly empty. There were a few potsherds, but none of the ceramics seemed to date back to Mycenaean times, when the tomb is believed to have been built. What they did find was a round stone in the middle of the tomb, which is believed to have been an altar of some kind. There was also a rectangular slab with a square indentation carved into it. The walls of the tomb were decorated with wall paintings of spirals. Even without any grave goods or a sarcophagus, archaeologists got the feeling this was something special. They believed this was built to be the tomb of a cult hero. It was likely built between 1400 and 1300 BC, at the same time that Tiryns was at its peak. It's not known if the tomb was ever used or if it was simply sacked during Roman times. We can't know for certain who the tomb was ever intended for. It's unlikely that one of the great heroes of ancient Greek myths was laid to rest here, but it could have belonged to someone who inspired one of the later myths. Tiryns is often associated with the famous hero Heracles. The king that gave him his 12 labors was the king of Tiryns. And his battle against the Nemean lion and the nine-headed Hydra took place near the city. Number 2. In 1742, a workman uncovered an underground chamber beneath the town of Royston in England. Almost 300 years later, the purpose of Royston Cave remains a perplexing mystery. The cave was located at the point where two important and ancient roads met. People had been traveling past this spot for hundreds of years, and in 1742 there was a market nearby. The workman uncovered a milestone that had been buried. When he lifted it, he found a shaft that led further below ground. He'd uncovered the entrance to this mysterious cave. At first, it was filled with dirt and rubble. When this was cleared away, a wall of creepy carvings was revealed. The room was 5 meters in diameter and 8 meters tall, with a conical roof. Some holes in the floor showed where wooden stands may have once stood, and it's believed a wooden platform once split the room in two. There was also a raised hexagonal step around the base of the walls, possibly used for prayer, and a shallow depression on the eastern side of the room. Of course, the most striking was the carvings. There were countless crudely carved figures, many without facial features or any details about their person. They may have once been painted, but the pigment is now almost entirely gone. What's left is too contaminated to be carbon dated. Most of the figures appear to be Christian saints or people from the Bible. 4 saints stand out prominently. Those are Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, Saint Catherine, Saint Lawrence, and someone who might be Saint George or Saint Michael. There's also a depiction of King Richard the Lionheart and Thomas Becket. The cave is definitely man-made, but archaeologists can't say for certain when it was created. When the cave was first discovered, there were reports of human remains among the rubble, but these were removed along with pottery shards that might have helped to date the room. The style of the artwork indicates some time between 1360 and 1390. Many theories have been put forward to explain this mysterious cavern. A popular theory is that it was used by the Knights Templar, an explanation that isn't as strange as it might seem. The order founded a town near Royston, which it used for farming to raise money for their campaigns. They would come to the market at Royston once a week. The group had had arguments with the priory in the town, and could have decided to build their own palace to stay when they were in Royston. The space would also be used to house their produce and for prayers. One of the wall carvings even appears to be Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Order. However, the Knights Templar had been disbanded at the start of the 1300s, and it's believed the carvings on the wall couldn't have been made any earlier than the 1350s. It's possible that the organization were the original makers of the space, and someone else created the carvings after the group was dissolved. Other theories include that it was simply a hermit's home. In medieval times, it wouldn't be uncommon to see a hermit at the side of the road. Travelers would pay these people to pray for them, which could be why St. Christopher was so prominent in the carvings. Less likely theories include it being a Freemason lodge created for King James I, or a storehouse for a nearby monastery. The cave is open to the public today, and people can visit and come up with their own answers to this strange mystery. Number 1. Explorations of the Arctic led to many unsuccessful missions and mysterious disappearances. While the most famous disappearances took place in search of the Northwest Passage above Canada, others vanished into thin air in the icy waters north of Russia. The Rusinov Expedition disappeared in 1912, and while traces of it were uncovered in 1930, exactly what happened is a mystery. The expedition was named in honor of Vladimir Rusinov, a geologist and explorer. He'd been to the Arctic a number of times and was leading a team of scientists on another trip north. At the time, the Svalbard archipelago in the Arctic Ocean was unclaimed and designated as no man's land. This wasn't stopping mining companies from claiming islands for themselves, though. There was coal buried beneath the frost-covered surface, and this was going to be incredibly important in the coming years. Rusinov's main objective was to claim the land on Spitsbergen, but there were other objectives that Rusinov kept to himself at first. The expedition left the port in Alexandrovsk on June 26, 1912, aboard a small ship named Hercules. Captaining the vessel was Alexander Kuchin, an oceanographer who'd been sailing since he was 17 years old. Also aboard the ship was Rusinov's fiancée, Juliet, who was working towards a geology degree and was also the ship's doctor. There were also 11 other scientists and sailors aboard. The first part of the expedition was successful. Over 6 weeks, the expedition claimed several areas where coal deposits were believed to be. They also collected zoological, botanical, and paleontological samples to help scientists further understand this frigid part of the world. After this was completed, Rusinov revealed that they wouldn't be going straight back to port. He wanted to travel east and further explore the northern sea route. The northern sea route is a shipping route that stretches from the island of Novaya Zemlya in the west to the Bering Strait in the east. Successfully navigating the route had been an important Russian objective since the 11th century, but it wasn't until 1879 that it was finally achieved. Even though it was known to be possible, completing the journey was still very dangerous, and there was a lot to learn about the route. For some reason, Rusinov was drawn to this area. It isn't clear if the Russian government had actually approved of his plan. He was already a somewhat controversial figure due to revolutionary actions in his youth, but the government had trusted him enough to lead the Svalbard expedition, so they may have permitted him to head further east. Rusinov offered the rest of the crew the choice of joining him or traveling home on a Norwegian trip. They decided to return home, taking the samples that the expedition had collected with them. The last known sighting of the Rusinov Expedition was in August of 1912. They'd made it to Novaya Zemlya, where a final message was sent back to St. Petersburg. Rusinov stated that he planned to travel past Wrangel Island, an island just before the Bering Strait. It would take a while for the message to reach St. Petersburg, and Rusinov didn't wait for an answer. No further news from the expedition was ever heard. There were campaigns for a rescue mission, but the beginning of the First World War interrupted any searches. Finally, in 1930, traces of a camp and some remains were located on a small island in the Kara Sea. A wooden post had been inscribed with the name Hercules and dated 1913, suggesting that at least some of the members of the expedition lasted into the new year. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.